alarm, so if the fire alarm does sound, it will be a real one. So move calmly to the entrance that you came in through and then down the ramps, and we'll convene there. Do we have any apologies for absence today, Jeremy?
Yes, we do. Councillor Amal Ali has given her apologies, and also Councillor Leslie Alexander with Councillor Jonathan Hucker substituting.
Brilliant. Oh, I've lost my agenda again.
I think it's declarations of interest next.
Yes, thanks. Do you have any declarations of interest for today's committee? In particular, draw your attention to the Code of Conduct for Planning and Regulatory Committees. If anybody has had any meetings with any of the interested parties in today's committee, I'd appreciate hearing about it. No? Good, okay. Does everybody agree that the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 13th of June are correct as stands? No, great, fab, thank you very much. Okay, action sheet. Do we have any outstanding actions? Peter, I don't think we do we?
No, I don't think we do, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay, on to appeals, nice and swiftly. Any appeals that you'd like to talk to us about?
No, Chair. Any questions, though, from members? Happy to respond.
No, good, okay. Any enforcement that you'd like to talk to us about?
No, Chair. Same again. Any questions? Happy to respond.
No questions. Good. Right, chatty bunch today. Okay, right, we are therefore going to move on to the public forum for our item for consideration today, which is Novers Hill. So first we have some questions. So I'm going to ask Tony Pitt to, if he is here. Yes, do you want to come up? You've asked 4 questions and they've been published, the answers. So you get 4 supplementary questions. So if there's any additional questions you'd like to ask, this is your time. Okay. If you come up to the mic and you can ask your additional questions there.
Hi there. So in the first question where I was asking about the dual allocation, housing and business, and the answer kind of says that it's in the consideration. So I guess the question would be then, can we have it in the report then? Can it explicitly say that allocation 1114 is for housing and business? Because I don't think it refers to that in the report. Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you there.
Sorry. So I'm just asking about the dual allocation, business and housing, and if that could be in the report.
Thank you. Peter.
I can report verbally, yes, that it's an allocation for housing and business use. So I can report that, but it's too late to amend the report now, but I have said that publicly here.
Well, we could, maybe if we ask Jeremy if you can make sure that it's minuted as such, then it's in the record through that mechanism as well.
Because I think that matters in terms of, like, you would have to treat it slightly differently, right? If you're not doing the 2 allocations, the 2 types of housing or business. So I think it matters for the decision, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, let me speak very closely to it. I'm not used to speaking into a microphone.
Yeah, do we need to maybe raise the microphone up a little bit so that, is that something we can do?
So it's fine. If I need to speak this closely.
Yes, you do.
Okay. That's the reason for raising it, is I think it affects. And then the second question was about this town and village green and the hedgerow that's protected under that. So the answer is there's no requirement to undertake work as part of this planning application, but doesn't it affect deliverability? So I think for your decision as councillors, I thought you needed to know about deliverability. So if the town and village green sort of swapping of holes in the hedge with some land is a big thing, I think that would sort of matter again to a decision.
Great. Peter, do you want to speak to that?
I think, Chair, I'll pick that up. We'll pick that up in terms of questions during the consideration of this, and then subsequently in the debate. I think it's probably best.
Okay, so are we clear on the question that we want to? Okay, maybe for the sake of clarity, do you want to repeat back the question just so that we don't get into a back and forth when we get to the actual member questions?
I've got to respond on town and village green status and hedgerows, and in respect of deliverability.
Fabulous. Does that?
Yes,
yep,
yes,
good.
Thank you.
Cool.
The third one was about whether it should have been sort of reconsulted. There was no face-to-face consultation because it was within a COVID period, and then I think under the Novers regeneration framework there should have been some face-to-face, and that would have been the opportunity of this, and sort of changes to the application would have given an opportunity. That's not really a question, is it? I'm not used to asking this in a question, which is...
So I think what the question is, because it was something I was going to ask about as well myself later, is that, so it was consulted on originally, and then in the answer to this question, into question 3, the answer was that the people that responded to the original consultation were then consulted at the altered designs, but it wasn't a full consultation. It was only the people that had previously responded to the consultation.
Yeah, so you had to have known about it to start with. Yeah.
No. Sorry. If that's not clear, but everyone that was consulted on the original application would have been consulted on the amendments. In addition, those who'd made representations would also have been consulted on the amendments that were made to the scheme. That's just our practice of how we do it. So it wasn't just people who'd made comments who were consulted on the amended submission by the applicants.
Okay.
And if that fits with Novers regeneration framework, then I guess that's the question answered. But I thought there was an extra level of engagement.
Because also, just to clarify, in terms of the answer that is on the papers, it says that following the receipt of the amended plans, a further round of consultation was undertaken on the 1st of March 23. Everyone who was consulted when the application was received and who commented on the 21 proposals was reconsulted in 23, which makes it appear that it was only the people who responded originally.
It's just my bad writing that. So that I've clarified what happened. We consulted widely on the resubmission and indeed on the first application. I think that's...
So everybody who was consulted originally got consulted even if they didn't comment? Okay, let's make sure that that's minuted as well, Jeremy. Thank you.
Okay. And then on this last one, which is about the site of nature conservation interest boundaries. So I'm still not sure that answer has answered the question, because I'm asking who needed to be involved, kind of were they involved? So I guess the question might be, do you agree that the local plan map accurately shows the SNCIs?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, my job is to assess the planning application. I'm being asked about whether the policy map is correct. I have to rely on the policy map that I'm given as an officer who deals with planning applications. I cannot comment on whether it is correct or not. What I can say is that I referred to the local plan policy map that is published and that we use. I can't say more than that, really. I'm not involved in the drawing up of that plan.
Okay, I mean, that doesn't really, it doesn't satisfy me in terms of giving me more explanation, but I guess that's the answer, right?
No, it's not a very satisfactory answer, but it is unfortunately all you got.
It's all I can say.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
but it's kind of an answer in its own way. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the public forum statements stage. So for this, you have a minute to speak. We operate a traffic light system. So at the end here, you'll see little traffic lights. So when you start your 1 minute, it'll be green. And then when you get down to the halfway point, it'll go amber. And that's where you want to start wrapping up. And then when it gets to red, that means that your time is up and I'll ask you to wind up. My top tip is that if it gets to amber, move on to your final points so that you get to say whatever the final things that you absolutely want to include before you run out of time. Okay, so the first person to speak is Mark Ashdown, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, this site has an important urban landscape and therefore is protected under SDM 17, and only development ancillary to the site is permitted. This isn't ancillary. Secondly, there's an argument about the boundary of the SNCI. We say it covers the whole of the development site, and I refer you to and commend you to the statement of Professor Antonia Layard, Professor of Law at Oxford University, which you'll find at A1, which gives a very cogent argument about that. You've heard the arguments about it being a common land, and that the hedge is an important hedgerow under the hedgerow regulations 1997, so be it. That will be dealt with. The next part is whether or not there's any biodiversity net gain. There clearly isn't. The applicant admits that, and the NPPF says that in those circumstances, having not secured any biodiversity gain, then the application should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, Michelle Roos, please.
Oh, I'm sitting down to do this. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't forget to switch on your mic, which is hopefully...
I think someone's doing it for me.
Okay. Yeah, should we test you before you start?
Okay. I live immediately next to the woodland on Novers Hill. I object to the proposal on environmental and health issues. The woodlands are extensive with native flora and fauna, including badgers, foxes, bats, slowworms, and many different types of bird life, including blue tits, chaffinches, jays, wood pigeons, and even buzzards, and many others. Insect life is also crucial, including dragonflies, damselflies, demoiselle, multiples of bees and wasps, and butterflies. All of these creatures visit my garden, which back onto the woods. I'm particularly worried about the bats, as they are a protected species under threat. They feed on the insects in my garden and I watch them avidly. The loss of this woodland will be a disaster, both for the local people and for Bristol generally.
Thank you very much. Norman Gillam, please.
Yes, I was born in Lower West nearly 80 years ago. I played on the slopes as a child. The slopes are a haven for wildlife, and this is absolutely should have been a matter of material planning consideration. There are a lot of native trees and wildflowers. Why would you want to spoil this? Why not build on brownfield sites first? There are many sites along the Artcliffe Way that could be put to better use if the council bothered to understand the area and us, the neighbours. Please leave the slopes alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julia Victor, please.
Local people like us have fought to protect Novers Hill for decades. Yes, Novers Hill, that site of nature conservation interest along the Hartcliffe Way, where the horses graze. The first planning application for the site came in 1965 and it was refused on grounds of transport, access and major ecology issues. And yet here we are again, history repeating itself. This site isn't deliverable. This site isn't for housing or industry. Instead, it is a place for children and nature to thrive, and we should be cherishing it. We keep fighting for Novers Hill because we're right. The Environment Agency, Avon Wildlife Trust and Chris Packham agree. You have the chance now to make sure that the 700 plus objections an unprecedented site in South Bristol get heard today. 58 years of tears and nonsense ends now.
Thank you very much. Danica Priest, please.
The surveys conducted for this application are woefully insufficient and riddled with errors. I don't have time for everything, but I thought I would highlight my favorite mistakes from this dreadful application. The applicant claimed they couldn't conduct a proper reptile or invertebrate survey because horses ate their mats. Otters were listed under the amphibian section. Instead of bird nesting season, it's besting season. Their redacted badger sections were just given a black highlight, so if you copied and pasted them into another document, you could read everything. And my personal favorite, they made the claim that their new housing would help save our local pubs. Novers doesn't have any pubs. As hilarious as that is, we can't make decisions based on flawed information. Level and Pegasus needs to understand that the allocated site does not automatically guarantee them approval. We've witnessed the extraordinary power of our community in action, coming together like a pack of superheroes to safeguard our beloved nature site. I'm so proud to be a part of this community, and I hope you will listen to our voices today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nazim Jamont Namin, please.
Hi.
Make sure you speak into the mic.
Yes, is that okay? Okay. With this statement, I object to the planning application and urge the committee to reject the application on the grounds that the land is extremely valuable for the environment and the local residents, and it is important. It is a house for all trees, birds, and wildlife population, and their value is known to everybody. It is essential for human life, and as the fifth green city in the UK, Bristol City Council has an obligation to protect it for us and for future generations. Bristol City Council cannot bring the clean air zone to Bristol Town Centre and at the same time introduce lots of houses to the area and then cut trees and destroy the nature and bring pollution to one of the most deprived areas in Bristol, which impacts humans' life in the area, including children and other people. Rejecting the planning application will be one of the significant steps towards achieving the net zero emission by 2030. Another crucial step towards it would be to make the entire Western Slope a nature conservative site. This will stop any future attempt to destroy this precious land once and for all. This planning application offers 30% affordable housing. The affordable housing in this project, in fact, will be acting as a buffer to protect the remaining unaffordable housing that only minority can afford buying them. This is discrimination against less privileged people and shows how irresponsible the developers are. They simply cannot be trusted. Please reject this application. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sue Chubb, please.
As a local resident and conservation volunteer, I care passionately about this beautiful green site. Novers Hill is such an important green corridor, rich in biodiversity, home to a number of rare and protected mammal species, plants and birds. This precious space is also loved and cared for by local people and their children. It is important for recreation, mental health and well-being, a green sanctuary in one of the most heavily polluted, deprived and congested areas in South Bristol. In the face of a relentless and rapid decline in nature due to habitat loss, pollution and the climate crisis, we must value and protect our existing green spaces and restore others to prevent further loss. This site is unsuitable for housing, being too steep, with safety issues regarding vehicle access and for many other reasons that I don't have time to elaborate on. I implore the Council to vote against this ill-thought-out proposal and protect this site from development, both now and in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have Alex Dibble today? No, she couldn't make it, okay. Councillor Zoe Goodman, please.
Hello, I'm Councillor Zoe Goodman, one of the two councillors for Filwood Ward, in which this application site is located. I urge the committee to follow the officer's recommendation and refuse this application. In my statement, I'm focusing on the most pertinent points in relation to development control, although there are many other issues that I'm not happy about. There is clearly a need for more housing in Bristol, and in particular in improving the diversity of housing in South Bristol. However, this application has many issues that have not been adequately addressed by the applicant. There are significant issues with transport access and safety, as have been identified by the Transport Department and by the Planning Officer in his report. The site is extremely steep, and yet shared paths are proposed on steep inclines to be shared by cyclists, pedestrians and wheelchair users, putting the safety of all groups at risk. There is an over-provision of car parking and an under-provision of cycling parking. It appears that the applicant presumes that most people will use cars in order to get on and off this steep site. This is clearly not compatible with the aim to reduce carbon emissions. That is not acceptable.
Sorry, you've gone over your
Very
minute.
quick. Steep gradients will also result in extensive cut and fill, which undermines the stability of the slope, and it will have a devastating impact on the ecology of the site and the joining area. I sincerely hope the committee votes to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, and then Tony Pitt, please.
So there's a long history. 8 planning applications have been refused, twice upheld on appeal. During Councillor Hedden-Holm's time as council leader, she mentioned in the Biodiversity Action Plan how Novers Hill had been saved from development. So I'm just asking how many times we keep having to have the same argument, the same conversation and the same battle. The site itself, the application itself, is not that great. Bristol South MP Karen Smith has spoken about the noise buffer for the social housing between the units on Hartcliffe Way. And there's a ETM, which is a recycling centre there that has an application which is likely to produce more noise, which the people from Pegasus and Lovell also commented on. And then, so just to mention again, the transport issues, the cycle path is not a good solution to what's happening in terms of safety, and it kind of weaves in and out of roads behind the hedge. It's not terribly safe. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've all done very well. Is there anybody here who has submitted a statement that wanted to speak, but I haven't called up yet? If you've done a statement, no? Okay, great. So what we're going to do is we'll move on to the officer presentation now. The committee has received the same slides that you'll see up there, we have on our laptop. So if we're not looking at the screen, it's because we're looking at our laptops where we can see them better. So over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for land on the west side of Novers Hill. It's an application for full planning permission for the erection of 144 dwellings on the site, including 43 affordable housing units, 30%, along with 2 access points from Novers Hill, provision of play facilities and public open space with associated works. You will have read the papers, so won't keep too long. I'm joined today by my colleague Pip Howson from the Transport Development Management team, primarily because a significant concern about this site is its steepness and the ability of it to actually deliver housing to be built upon. So that's the application site. I've swiveled it around. You'll see the north point because I couldn't get it on the PowerPoint presentation, so you've got to kind of look to one side. But that, I'm sure you all know where it is on Novers Hill. The further slide underlines how steep the site is and the issues that the applicant has had to address in designing a scheme for this site. This is the proposed master plan, and I've included within your papers the details of the different sorts of housing that form part of the application proposal. The next slide I think we need to deal with, and that is in respect of the allocation. The reason why we have a planning application here is that historically this site has been allocated for housing and for business, just to clarify, but it's been allocated for development with a slither running through which is a site of nature conservation interest, so that's with reference to the SNCI. Historically, that's been there for a long time. We're reaching the end of this local plan period. We haven't had an application in the early period of the plan. It's coming at the end. It's worth underlining and stating publicly that we do have a need for housing in the city. We cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply, and that's very serious. And we've had to take, as planning officers, we have to take that extremely seriously and say, really, with the law says that we should follow local plan allocations unless we have very good reasons not to do so. In this case, and you will have heard the representations on ecology, and they're very strong, but my concern on that, and it's set out in my papers, was the outcome of the Brislington Meadows decision and how much weight the inspector in that case gave to ecology in comparison to the allocation of the site for housing. The answer to that question is that they didn't really give as much weight as perhaps people would have liked. In this case, there are strong ecological issues in relation to this site, and they have not been resolved, and that forms the reason, my third recommended reason for refusal. Really, we are saying that the applicants would need to go away and resolve a number of matters if they were to push forward with this in respect primarily of ecology. You'll have as well the comments about biodiversity net gain from our ecologist set out in your paper. The primary reason, though, is transport grounds and the steepness of the site and the ability of the site to achieve the 144 houses proposed. Your officers, put simply, your officers think it cannot do it, it's too steep, and therefore are recommending that planning permission be refused. But I'm going to pass over now to Pip to just address transport issues.
Thank you, Chair. This site, due to its the topography and that there is only one area that it can be entranced from on a very narrow, very steep hill that has no provision for walking and cycling at the moment. It would also not meet the criteria to create safe cycling and shared space facilities. But if we move down a slide, I've just identified some key issues that we've had with the site and put some explanations. So there is a lot of safety concerns on the public highway. The new road network necessary for a development of this size has to be built to adoptable standards, and the adoptable standards at this particular location require quite significant infrastructure to go in, and that is very, very expensive. So we do have concerns that a future viability would be impacted by the cost of the infrastructure. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we looked at the permeability of the site. The NPPF clearly states that something of this size of development should be sustainable for transport, and the plans as they stand only have indicative walkable and cyclable routes in the interim of something coming forward on the neighbouring site. We've had no application for that site, so you have to make interim provision, and within the site itself you can see that the topology is so steep, it would, can we go to the next slide please? It would not, what I would call, provide equity of movement. So everyone who lived on there would be car dependent. That is not a satisfactory way for us to develop in Bristol. If they had been able to provide connections to Hartcliffe, there would have been a bit more of a chance that the bus could be, but it's a very busy road, so cycling and walking still has to be seriously considered. I met with the applicant last year and asked them to address these issues, but the further application had not addressed any of those issues. So my predecessor, who had set the objection for this site, we think it still stands. Peter, if you could go to the next slide. So specifically road safety, we've put a couple of pictures up to show the current status of that road, and we've compared it to the steepness of Park Street just outside, where you can see what space a wide footway needs to be achieved by just standing outside. So we thought it was a good comparison to show you what kind of space is needed to achieve any kind of shared use space. And we don't believe, especially if you're trying to prevent the destruction of the hedgerows, it means that there's less and less space for that to be achieved. And again, we didn't get a satisfactory answer from the applicant or one that passed a safety audit. Next, please. So again, another couple of views to show you what we mean about the impact on the highway. And in the third picture, you can see the retaining wall that is there to protect the housing on the existing housing. And you can see how substantial that retaining wall has to be. So you can imagine over a large site that they would like to deliver what the cost of building something like that could be. And although construction itself is not a planning matter, the viability is, and the cost of implementing the scheme to an adoptable standard would impact on the viability. So next slide, please. So we looked at how they proposed to do things internally, and these slides show you what the topography is and how steep certain things are. It would be a pretty fit person that had to manoeuvre through those paths as planned at the moment. So everything I'm talking about is how we're looking at it as a comprehensive, linking it all into the long-term road safety of the environment. So no comfortable walking or cycling environment, and definitely no safe connection to the public highway. Next slide. And this slide is simply to show what the structural requirements could be, by showing you the actual topography and how it lies. And so if you refer back to the photo that we just showed you with the retaining walls, that is the sort of retaining walls. And then you look at the plan of how many houses need to be along one of those retaining walls. It won't just not be safe for road safety, it could end up being not safe for anyone who lives below it, or anyone who works below it, or the river, or the water below. So it's not that it's impossible to create, it's just absolutely hugely expensive just to put the infrastructure in. So therefore, the road safety objection combines the existing impact plus the future environment that could be public highway on the site. So I hope that gives you a brief summary that's detailed in Peter's report.
Just to continue, Chair, and to summarise, a number of points came up in the public forum comments. In terms of deliverability and the impact on hedgerows and village, town and village green status, I think there are noted and they would need to be addressed. I think there's a lot of ecology that needs to be dealt with. I wrote into the report paragraph 10.5.1 that I would update you at the committee. Forgive me, I have no additional information at this time. What I think we are saying on ecology, though, is we agree that this is a sensitive site. We agree that there is a lot that needs to be done to resolve that, but primarily the concern that we as officers have in respect to this site is its steepness and its safety for future residents and indeed surrounding residents of adding housing into this into this area. So accordingly, we recommend refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, both. So to clarify, even though the report's focusing on steepness and safety, that doesn't actually take anything away from the environmental impact, which is also not resolved in any way whatsoever. So it's not to be taken that because that's not the focus of the objection, that it isn't still a significant part of it that has been resolved in any way. Yeah, exactly, they go together. Lovely, thank you. Hopefully that is clear. Before we get on to member questions, there was a question from Tony Pitt that you said you were going to come back to.
I thought
you
just did
yeah,
on hedgerows.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you want to just for absolute clarity, just to answer that?
Yeah,
So
I think
that it's
the question was about deliverability, and the fact that yes, there is a town and village green, plus impact on hedgerows, all goes to the overall difficulties of delivering housing on this site.
Good, thank you. Just to make that absolutely 100% clear. Okay, so questions, Lorraine, and then Fabian, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just got it's not really a question. I just want, so you know the infrastructural thing, so the actual road network that doesn't exist, that would have to be built, and that wall that looks like the Great Wall of China, which is one of the walls, I guess. Who would cover the cost of that?
That would be the developer has to provide it to get an approval in principle by our infrastructure team, which would then say that was fit to build. So there is a process there, but we do think that the cost of creating that would be significant. Yeah. But we wouldn't necessarily say that we know exactly what that would be today. But it could impact on a second viability to detract from the social, the affordable. That's what overall our concern is.
And I think you mentioned, sorry, Chair, that there was no link to say like Artcliffe either, which could have helped with that kind of infrastructural connections. You didn't say that, but you said something like that.
What we're saying is, if you lived there and you were a regular alpine climber, you would probably have no problem. You'd probably enjoy living there. But the average person, that would be strenuous. And to bring your shopping back and just day-to-day living. But it's quite a trek to any form of public transport. So you would be car dependent. And that we don't feel is a very good, sustainable practice.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Chair, can I just clarify one point? The viability is up to the applicant. It's not for you to say, oh, you can't afford it, you can't do it. It's entirely up to them. If they say they can afford it, they can afford it. And we can't start turning around and going, no, you can't, just as we couldn't for someone proposing a garage on their house, saying, no, you can't afford that, can you? So we've got to be a bit careful there in terms of the viability of it. That is entirely up to the applicant.
Yeah. Can I just say, so because I think I was just trying to get a sense of the scale of the challenges sort of thing, because it sounded really quite huge, and I just wanted to sort of get a sense of how bad it was really. So thank you.
Thanks. Pip's response is now making me think of alpine goats and mountain goats doing shopping. Fabian.
Thank you, Chair. If we could look at the internal gradients slide, please. I think it may be one or two back. That's the one. That's the one. Could somebody please explain the colour coding?
Sorry, I'm just bringing up my version of the presentation. It was in the notes. Basically, all the coloured bits are steeper than 1 in 20. And 1 in 20 is the maximum recommended gradient for according to Inclusive Mobility, LTN 120, Manual for Streets. So all the guidance says you shouldn't have anything that's steeper than 1 in 20. If you do, you need to have, it's classed as a ramp. So all those bits that are coloured there on the left-hand side are steeper than that 1 in 20. So the orange bit is 1 in 12, blue is 1 in 14, and green is between 1 in 18 and 1 in 20. So most of that site is steeper than is recommended.
So the orange is the steepest
That's right, yes.
and the blue is the least steep, but it still exceeds the recommended maximum.
Yeah, in steepness, the orange is the steepest, then the blue, and then the green. So the green parts are really to try and enable larger vehicles to be able to access the site.
Okay, so basically, even if they could build it and get it through, there's still the issue of actually the average person being able to live there.
That's correct.
Okay, and then just to sort of, for visualisation, what colour would Park Street be as a comparison?
Park Street is around the orange mark. So, yeah.
Thank you. And there's a bench halfway up that for resting because it's so steep.
There should be more benches up there for resting. Yeah, and similarly with the width of the footway. So that's what we're trying to pull together with that photograph to compare that.
Right. Thank you. Fabian.
So basically the shared cycle, wheelchair and pedestrian footways are about the same, narrower than the pavements on Park Street. Is that what was implied?
That's correct.
Thank you. Any more questions? Katia?
I didn't hear the part about Park Street. What is Park Street on the 1 to 20 scale?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's looking like the orangey bit there, between 1 in 12 and 1 in 14, okay. We'd say. So, yeah, that's why we've been using it as a comparison. It's roughly.
So this is steeper than Park Street.
It's in the same.
But a narrower pavement.
Correct.
Walkway.
Yeah. So the shared use cycle path that goes through the site is narrower than the narrower footway on Park Street.
All I can say is I've taken my electric bike up Park Street and it struggles.
Thank you. Any other questions? Guy, did you have one? Randomly waving.
I did, if that's okay, Chair, very quickly, and apologies, I'm trying to find the relevant chunks of this because it's fairly spread out. I just wanted to ask a question in regards to the officer's concerns around including the environmental factors in the recommendation for refusal. And I'm just thinking specifically in regard to the site allocations document. If I'm looking at the right, I just wanted to make sure I had it to hand while I was got it. I'm assuming it's B118, is that the right one? In regard to the actual allocation itself.
So on the screen you can see the red line is the application site, right. Then you've got part in BSA 1114 and part in BSA 1108. Those are the allocations from when the plan was adopted in 2011.
Just in regard to that, because that document makes quite significant mention under development considerations of all of the, as well as mentioning the sloping nature of the site, all of the remaining bullets, I think, refer to environmental factors. I was wondering if, because in this case, the site allocations document made so much reference to the environmental value of the site, whether we think the inspector might be inclined to take a different view on this specific case.
I think what I would say, it's a really difficult one to answer. We have to take allocations for housing really seriously, and we do, and that's reflected. So I did actually I spoke with legal colleagues about this. Do you think I can go against an allocation? Is the steepness of the site sufficient to go against the allocation? Because really, I should, particularly mindful of how much housing we need as a city, go with that allocation, unless I've got really good reasons not to do so. And the legal advice I received was that yes, you do have really good reasons, and that's basically the deliverability of this site for housing. But the reality is that at some point in time, as a full council, presumably, everyone lifted their hand and said, yep, that's okay for housing. So that happened, and that's serious. So just, when allocations are made, it's a business, a serious business in doing so.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any more questions? Go on, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I know the area reasonably well, and it had always occurred to me as being an area that would be challenging to develop. I was surprised to learn that an application had come forward in the 1960s, and I wonder how many applications this area has been subject to over the years.
I think, as was said in the public statement, that there have been regular attempts to secure planning permission for housing on this site. Within your papers, within the report, there is the planning history listed. I've included the most recent applications. Forgive me, I haven't got the dates. I haven't got the report printed off, but within that relevant planning history section, you'll be able to see when the last application was.
Yeah, I think, there you go. Do you want to look at mine? There you go.
Yes, so the last application we had on this actually went to appeal in 2003, so it was 20 years ago. So there have been regular attempts to secure planning permission, and each along the way has been defeated. There it is. Yeah, there was an appeal in 2003. Prior to that, 2002, there was an application. It's set out at section 3 of the committee paper.
Okay. The papers, have they always lost the appeals if it's gone to appeal?
Yeah, well, the most recent they did, 2003.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Go on, Guy.
An apology, Chair. I just wanted to get clarification on an almost, potentially clerical matter, I suppose. But under 6.3, we have a different format for the Equalities Impact Assessment than maybe the committee is used to, just insofar as it refers to officers having applied their minds to the 20 potential equalities considerations that the decision-making process has to give due regard to. I'm just wondering if that is the new way of doing things. Has this been checked? Basically, my understanding was that this committee would have to apply its mind to those characteristics as well as officers. And this format seems to suggest, no, officers have done that, you don't need to worry about it. And I just wanted to check what the legal position was in regards to us, or why it was that the impact assessment wasn't included in the papers pack.
Well, we don't, I mean, first point, we wouldn't include all the papers in the pack. You can imagine there's a wealth of information that comes through on the application. I don't think we're saying officers we've assessed equalities and you don't have to. You do. That's what that's part of your consideration. We are all the local planning authority in considering this planning application, and so we will address equalities as a whole. What I offer there is our officers' assessment. And that's how we set it out in the report. I don't know your point about format. I think I've started numbering paragraphs simply because it helps me when you're asking me questions and I've got to think quick on my feet. If I've got a paragraph number, I can get to it quicker. That's the only reason I've done that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any more questions? Good. Okay. Who would like to have an opinion and start off the debate? Lorraine.
I have an opinion, Chair. I think as a member of this committee, we spend a lot of time really scrutinising all the paperwork and really grilling the officers when they make their recommendations and presentations. And I think in this instance they've done a really good job of balancing their argument, and I think it's been really thorough. And the fact that you've gone away, sought advice before coming, I think it's been really helpful in laying out the thought processes, etc. And I think equality impact assessments within the council is pretty crap most of the time, so it's really good that you've taken a lot of time to think it through. So I don't think that's an issue. I'm going to vote for the officer's recommendation because I think it's the right thing to do, and I think the area should be developed in other ways and stop trying to build on green sites when there are other buildings that could be utilised and brought into use. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorraine. No, you're Lorraine. Guy.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, as my colleague was saying, we look at these things in a huge amount of detail, and obviously we're required by law and our own consciences to come to these things unpredetermined. And I want to make it clear, I really did come into this with an open mind and looking to be persuaded that there might be some reason to support this. I would struggle to think of a worse application that I've seen for quite some time. It's fantastic to have the officer outline the headline reasons for refusal, and particularly around the transport considerations. I feel quite strongly about the nature implications of it as well. I appreciate that there's a situation with the inspector. Personally, I would feel more comfortable if we gave more reasons for refusal. But I'll be steered by the committee. I think the transport links alone would be reason enough. I used to represent, as some of you know, a community called Lockleys on the northern fringe, which had similar issues around permeability and the impossibility of getting basically from one side of the neighbourhood to the other without turning left, right, and sort of weaving your way through it. This seems to have similar problems, and also it raises the issue of, I suppose, legibility, which hasn't been raised in the report, I don't think, unless I missed it. But that simple inability, from what I can see here, to walk around this area and know roughly where you're going or where the road that you're going down is going to lead, it looks incredibly kind of esoteric from a top-down view, not to mention the slope. It's hard really to see. I'm slightly terrified. I might have voted on the site allocations document way back in the day, but I now would really struggle to see how it even made it in there in the first place, given the challenges to be overcome in developing it. So at this point, it's a definite no from me, unless someone has something spectacular to change my mind. Thanks.
Thank you, Fabian.
Yeah, I think going through the report, it's abundantly clear what the issues are. And I think the officer's done an excellent job of explaining what they are. I mean, okay, so yes, we would like to focus on, those who objected, would like to focus on environmental and ecological things, but we have to think about what we can actually pin this down with. What are watertight? If we're going to refuse, and I'm minded to support, I'm going to be supporting the officer recommendation, has to be on grounds that are watertight, and if it does go to appeal, we'll stand up and appeal. So I think the officer recommendation is sound. It is, the idea of having a shared footpath, for wheelchair users, bikes, pedestrians, that's as steep as Park Street and narrower than one pavement of Park Street, and cyclists actually use the road on Park Street, not the pavement. So, if you put cyclists on the pavement in Park Street, that would be bad enough and dangerous enough. You're dealing with something that's narrower than that. It's just crazy. And there's the question of how safe it would be if they, to actually sort of put the infrastructure in to actually build on in the first place. And that's, how much it would cost isn't a planning consideration, but, I think, I'm quite happy the officers have, we've covered, the officers know what a good reasons for refusal, and I think we should just go with them rather than try to add to them and potentially make ourselves hostages to fortune. You know, with, you know, a particularly bloody-minded inspector, we could really find ourselves in a bit of a mess. So if we try altering or adding to the grounds for refusal, I think the grounds for refusal are sufficient, and I think we should support the officer's recommendation, accept the grounds for refusal that they've drawn up, and leave it at that. I think, trying to do any tinker with it could be, given what happened with Islington Meadows, could be dangerous, and I think we should avoid that.
Thank you. And I'd like to also thank Peter and Pip and all of our planning officers actually in the planning department for the work they've done on this. It's great to see that equity of access is getting such a strong weight, as well as really important going forwards that we do have equity of access in what we build. And I want to say as well to everybody who's objecting on environmental grounds, it's very good and important that it's a strong reason for rejecting it on transport and safety grounds, but make it clear it doesn't negate the very serious environmental impacts that this could have. And just because those aren't the main grounds for the officer recommendation, it doesn't negate any of the objections that you have. It is an unfortunate thing in planning law that environmental impact has lower precedence than it should do. However, as time progresses, hopefully that will be changed and balanced out. I'll obviously be voting for the officer recommendation, just to make that clear. I saw Guy had his hand up again. No?
Thank you, Jay. If you'll permit me or indulge me, I suppose I just wanted to get some real clarification from the officers on this point, because this is something that's coming up increasingly frequently. To what extent is our assessment or anyone's assessment of the success or not of a future appeal a material consideration for us to consider? Because I can understand looking at previous judgments of inspectors on previous appeals as a way of informing the committee as to how an inspector might interpret a decision of ours. But I would really like to know whether this is something that we speculate on but doesn't add any weight to our decision either way, or whether it's something that does, because it increasingly is a subject of discussion.
Okay, I'll allow a brief response to that, but we have moved on from the question and answer fun stage. So, Peter, quickly.
Very quickly, you must assess the application on its merits. You mustn't start thinking, oh, we might lose an appeal. Put simply, you've got to assess it on its merits and the recommendation before you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Now, has anybody else got something they'd like to add to the debate, Sarah?
Yep, I mainly want to just echo the comments that have already gone through. Firstly, for the officers that have put the work into this, it's been really, really fantastic. And my lack of question is not because of a lack of curiosity, but because I felt like I had a lot of information in front of me already to make a decision. And similar to the people that have already spoken, the lack of equity in terms of access to the site is very worrying, and is what sways my decision. As someone who regularly cycles up the comparatively gentle incline of Hartcliffe Way, I can imagine being stuck at the top of, in a house at the top of that. You would be completely car dependent, and that's not what we should have in the city. And transport links, especially in South Bristol, are woefully inadequate anyway, especially when you add a giant massive hill into a residential area. So yes, I'll be voting in line with the officer recommendations.
Fantastic. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. Can you push the mic towards you? Sorry?
Bring the mic towards you, otherwise it won't pick you up.
Yeah.
Bend. Yeah. Good.
Am I here now?
Just about.
Just wanted to say that, surprisingly, I agree with Councillor Breckles in everything he said about this particular application. And I think we should move on ahead and make sure we don't overthink the problem. So,
thank you.
As soon as we can, I think we should move towards a vote, and I would support the officer's recommendation.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I was going to ask if anybody who hasn't spoken would like to, they're very welcome to. Otherwise, okay, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I think that the officers' recommendations are very credible, and I would also just like to mention that I recognise that the Friends of Western Slopes have been very active in raising the profile of this matter, and I pay tribute to the work that they've done.
Fantastic. So I'd like to move us to a vote unless anybody else has a burning desire to speak. No? Can I have a seconder, please? Fabian's hand was quickest. So he wins. Okay, so we'll do named roll call. I'll start over with Chris. Would you like to vote, Chris, for the officer recommendation or otherwise? Into the mic.
Support the officer's recommendation. I vote for it.
Thank you very much. Jonathan.
Thank you. I support the officer recommendation.
Thank you very much, Guy.
4.
Lorraine.
4.
Sarah.
4.
Katia. 4. Fabian.
4.
And 4 from me, so that's unanimous. So that's rejected. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for everybody who's come and engaged in this particular process. We'll see you at the nice, exciting instalment of DCB, which is in September at some point. I can't remember when, but I'll be here. It'll be at 6 p.m. and see you then. Thank you very much.